Good morning, all. So until last class, we have discussed all about the fundamentals and then the new techniques and approaches people are taking to go beyond the limitation, and also we understand the losses and limitations of solar. Right now, today I will talk about three more things in terms of next generation solar materials. Because if you summarize the cost of a solar cell or solar panel or technology, you will see the total overall cost. One is of course the limitation is the efficiency and all this thing, how much efficient the solar cell you can make, and the other thing how easily you can fabricate the solar cell, right? The material and the processing cost, that is almost 30%, 30-40% of the overall module cost, right? For example, silicon, for silicon to fabricate in terms of very crystalline and very pure form thin films, it requires a lot of high temperature, high pressure. So over a large area, if you want to grow silicon wafers and all this thing, that causes a lot of funding, right? So that is why after certain amount of time, certain amount of level, you cannot really reduce the silicon solar cell cost, because the material and the fabrication cost you cannot play with, right? So at that point, like the other way, people are trying to come up with new ideas to increase the efficiency and all these things. People are also trying to find out new materials and new fabrication technologies. Like suppose in case you can fabricate your solar cell, for example, on room temperature, like 50-40 degrees centigrade, 40-50 degrees centigrade in your lab scale. And if you want to make a very large area, that is not a problem, and you can make flexibles. So all these advantages can build up and can really minimize the fabrication cost and ultimately the production cost, right? So we'll talk about that part today, next generation flexible solar cells and the new materials coming up. So before that, we'll talk about the PV status and why we are continuously searching for new ideal materials. And then I will go for three very the champion materials nowadays all are working on, like polymer solar cell, perovskite solar cell, and disynthesized solar cell. So we'll talk about more like informative things there. So not my like earlier classes where I give you the theoretical things and equations and all these things. So these will be like more like demonstrations and more like information for you. Okay. So let us go ahead. So if you see the current scenario of PV technology, you will see there are two trends. One is established PV technology and people are trying to modify them more. And there are other trends which is emerging. People are trying to find out new materials, new technologies, new applications. Let us have a comparative look. So for established technology, the first name that comes into mind is silicon PV. 90% commercial solar cells are made of silicon only. Right, and few companies are also making like CIGA, CDT, PV modules. They are also commercially available. Now, when we talk about one technology, the fourth thing we have to really compare that how efficient that technology is, how long, how stable, how long you can use once you buy something, how much you have to pay, the cost, and how much toxicity or environmental hazards you can create by using those materials, right? So for silicon PV, the efficiency is very high. Not very, but high. You can consider it high. Similarly, CIGS also, the existing two technologies, efficiency are not low, high. Both of them have longer life. They are stable materials, but both of them have very high cost, right? For silicon specifically, silicon is an indirect band gap material, so you cannot absorb to very efficiently by silicon. So you have to have one thick layer of silicon, minimum 300 microns. And as I said, 300 micron silicon uniform fabrication of films over area of suppose for 8-inch by 8-inch or 4-inch by 4-inch wafer, that will be really costly. Similar thing happens for CIG acidity also, because the fabrication is not that difficult, but the material scarcity, it is not available very easily. Those materials are not that much available like silicon. Silicon is basically sand, right? But CIG acidity, you hardly found them in art crust. So that also cost a lot. And in terms of toxicity, silicon is not that environment friendly, but it is okay, still okay if you recycle all these things. So I would say the toxicity for silicon is moderate. But for CIG acidity, they are really toxic materials. You really cannot. They are like batteries. You should not throw your battery after it degrades, right? it has a lot of hazardous chemicals inside. So similarly, CIGS CDT also, if you are talking about solar panels and you are imagining one world that every cell, every roof and every road and every open area is covered by solar panels, you really cannot think of these materials, because once those cells and the modules are degraded after their lifetime, you have to recycle them. And if you dump them on the soil or somewhere other places in water or something, it can cause a really bad environmental impact, because they are highly toxic materials, right? So they are we can also compare the emerging technologies like polymer solar cell and perovskite dye-synthesized solar cell. We have something very unique. Like for polymer solar cells, they are soluble, they are liquid, they are like ink. The way you write and all these things, the way you paint a house, they are like that. You can make ink and you can print them in a roll-to-roll basis. Like the newspaper we print, we take printout from our computer machines and all these things. You can print a solar cell on any surface. So that makes it very easy for fabrication thing, right? So obviously the cost goes a lot lower than the other existing technology. Similarly for perovskite also, you can make ink solution and you can use. So definitely they have low cost and they are very highly absorbing. So you just need like few nanometers of layer, 100 nanometers of this material layer, organic or perovskite, is more than sufficient enough to absorb the 100% of solar spectrum. Then what are the problem? Efficiency. Polymer solar cell does not have a very high efficiency, and now it is now picked up a lot. When it was started, it was like 4-5%. Nowadays it is around 15-16%, which is moderate, I would say. Perovskite solar cell has really high efficiency. This field started around 2007-2009, and by 2021, from 1% efficiency to it has almost reached 28-29% efficiency. So it's suited like a rocket. No other solar cell in the history of evolution of photovoltaic technology has seen such an unprecedented growth the way perovskite solar cell has seen. The cost is low, the efficiency is high, but the stability, both these materials are not stable. That there is a phrase that if you want to have something good, you have to pay good, right? So when you are buying something low cost, the stability is very low because these materials are soluble, so they are soft materials. So they very easy for oxygen and moisture to penetrate these thin films, and they are also like 100 nanometer films only, right? So their stability is of course very low. They do degrade very rapidly in the real environment condition, but unfortunately you have to install your solar cells on the rooftop, right? In the real you cannot keep them inside AC room. So in that condition they degrade in minutes and hours and days. So at current stage their stability is the highest grand challenge these emerging technologies are facing. And in terms of toxicity, polymer solar cells are organic things. They are only carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen kind of things, so there are absolutely no toxicity involved. But for perovskite, we do have lead inside. So lead, very small amount lead, but we do have lead. So that toxicity is another problem for perovskite solar cell. And if we talk about the perovskite is dominating the whole PV technology, then we have to be very careful. Like the batteries and all these things, they are also use lead, right? So we have to be very careful to recycle those cells, and they are soluble. So the problem is even higher because if you have slight leak in a rainy day, the whole material of the panel can be dissolved in water and can come out and mixed with the rainwater and drinking water and the soil near about. So you have to be very careful, specifically for perovskite solar cells. So how to insulate them, how to package them, and how to recycle them, and day-to-day maintenance. Otherwise, you will see in my next talk after a few minutes that they are really promising. They can open up really new horizons for whole PV application, right? For example, I'm just giving you some idea. Suppose the ink, the color you are painting for a building, suppose you think it is made of polymer semiconductors or perovskite semiconductor, and you paint a whole building, and that building under the outside wall, of course, the building under the sunlight in daytime is capable enough to produce electricity from the painting itself, right? The windows you made, instead of glass, if you take semi-transparent or transparent polymer or perovskite and you make those windows can generate power for you. Suppose you have an umbrella, you are relaxing on a sea beach in a hot summer day. That umbrella is made of a flexible solar cell. That umbrella can generate enough power to run a music system or charge your battery. Or if your clothes, the textiles you wear, like the jackets and all these things, if they are made of flexible solar cell, you are running or jogging in a fine winter morning and you are charging your mobile phone in your pocket using the sunlight you are receiving on your body. Right. So this kind of building integrated thing, textile, flexible, indoor, outdoor applications, everything will change, which is beyond the imagination of solid state silicon or CIGS solar cell, right? So it can open up many things, even for military. Some military persons are living in tent on high altitude and they hardly have any power backup, right? Think of the tent material, the textile is made of solar cell and that tent can itself make power for them. They can charge their military devices, they can run their entertainment device, they can cook. So these things, these flexible solar cell, the polymer, perovskite, synthesized, although they have some grand challenges right now, but the potential, the possibilities they bring, that is huge. The wide and broad applications we can think, starting from space to day-to-day life, the decoration, the integration, everything is possible, right? So the whole paradigm of the solar technology, the application point of view can be revolutionized using these emerging technologies. That is why so many people are working nowadays. The whole community is get inspired by thinking of all these things, right? The possibilities of these emerging technologies, and many research are nowadays being focused on these emerging solution processable flexible solar cells. And that is why I would say the cost, toxicity, stability, efficiency, these are the four pillars which keeps us running for the hunt of the ideal low-cost PV materials, which can bring all these facilities and advantage on single plane. Right. So I will basically talk about three technologies here: polymer solar cells, perovskite, and isostatic. Let us start with polymer solar cells. They are also known as organic solar cells. Why organic? Because there is nothing, no atoms or chemistry is involved, which involves inorganic materials. They are purely carbon, hydrogen kind. Right? If you put them on soil, they will be degraded bio process following the bio, like any other living organism degrades. Right? So these cells are, that is why known as organic or polymer solar cells. So basically the talk will consist of the background of this invention, how it evolved with time, the limitations, the future aspects. So these are some of the typical image of solar cell. They are made of Konarka and Cambridge University and all this thing. So you can see they are like film, right? And they are flexible. You can just wrap it anywhere. They looks like common plastic, right? So initially, even in our childhood days, if you remember, if we talk about plastic, what comes first in our mind? That's some carry bag or some insulating coating over our electrical wires and all these things, right? Hardly anything we can imagine where we thought that plastic can conduct electricity or plastic can generate electricity, right? Term plastic usually comes like insulating material, something which can hold up many things, which is impermeable, which can proof the shock, right? But these three gentlemen, Professor Ellen Hager and McDermott and Professor Hideki Shirakawa, around 19th century, end of the 19th century, shortly they published one paper where they showed that this insulating plastic, if you can create some conjugation inside the plastic by doping or by changing their bond structure. What is conjugation? Conjugation is a repeat unit of single bond, double bond, single bond, double bond kind of thing. It's a repeat unit. If you can create that, not only plastic becomes semiconductor and conduct current, they can produce current, and that opens up many like organic LEDs, organic FET, organic OPP. So this was the paper which is the father of all these inventions we are talking about nowadays. And around 2000 they got Nobel Prize for their paper, right? And they also established a lot of startup and industries who is still now working on these aspects. So these are some chemical, very known old chemical structures that people have started with at that point of time. Nowadays, we have many advanced chemistry and chemical molecules and all these polymers available. But the conjugation that I was talking about, you can see here. Suppose we are talking about this material. You see, you start from here. I have a double bond, then a single bond, then a double bond, then a single bond, then a double bond, single bond, double bond, single bond, double bond. So this is basically the conjugation. This is basically the conjugating path, right? If I don't have that, somehow the electrons cannot move from this material, they become insulated. But if I have a double bond conjugation, single bond double bond conjugation, now the electron cannot move everywhere, but they can follow this conjugation length and they can travel through this molecule to the next molecule, like that. So this is what the conjugation. Every molecule you see, there is a conjugation path: double bond, single bond, double bond, single bond, double bond, single bond, like that for these and everywhere. So that is the conjugation I was talking about, and that was the invention they made that completely changed the nature of the polymers. And you know, by changing this conjugation type and the conjugation length, that how many molecules, over how many molecules such conjugation is there, you can very easily you can tune their band gap. So these molecules are not only flexible, they are so flexible, not only flexible in terms of mechanical flexibility, they are flexible in terms of physics and chemistry also. You can change their band gap, you can change their conjugation length, and once you can change their band gap, they can absorb light wherever you want, right? So let us see how this band gap forms on the conjugation aspect. Anyway, before that, as I was saying, we can have many applications which was beyond the imagination for silicon technology. So basic advantages: these materials are extremely cheap, low cost, low temperature at room. You can fabricate roll to roll, printing is possible, extremely environment friendly material, abundant, and can be semi transparent. You can use as a glass and all these things. Ultra flexible, stretchable, lightweight, light condition, they can still work, and they are color tunable. Color tunable means if you see these three colors are coming from the same molecule just by changing their molecular conjugation length. Now you have so many color, and once you have so many flexibility in terms of color and all these things, then you also talk about building integration and the fancy architecture and so-called state-of-art things, right? So this is one of the carry bag which is having a organic flexible solar cell here, and you can connect this charger and you can keep your coffee mug, or you can just keep your mobile phone for charging or making the coffee hot. And this is another flexible semi-transparent solar cell. You can see this is one solar cell where all these colors are basically by tunable molecules, and this such a nice architecture you can fabricate, right? So how these bands and all these things are forming for organic cells, that is the primary question, right? So as I said, it is basically the pi conjugation. This is basically the single bond double bond conjugation. Otherwise it was normal polymer and normal plastic, it would have been insulating, right? So when we have that sp2 hybridization, then in normal cases we have only sigma bond for carbon carbon, right? But when we have that sp2 hybridization, there is a electron cloud overlapping between these pz orbitals here and here. And this, suppose now you imagine this kind of arrangement I have like extended. Whenever I have a conjugation, I have this kind of setup, and this overlap is getting spreaded, right? So through these pi bond electron cloud overlap, actually my electrons can now hop from one side to other side, one side to other side, right? Through this sigma bond, it is not possible because they are localized. These are the delocalized states. They are like random, right? So this delocalization of pi electrons making the things semiconducting. And when I have one carbon atoms, then I have something like pi star, right? Pi star. Now, if I have number of atoms more, so each of these pi star will spread like the way we saw the band gap formation for inorganic. Here also something similar is happening in the other terms, pi broadening, but similar thing. And the more and more atoms I put on the conjugation length, this spreading is going on, right? Then finally, in terms of inorganic semiconductor, what we had valence band, conduction band. Here we call it highest occupied molecular level orbital, lowest occupied molecular orbital, but they are very analog kind of valence band and conduction band. Here we call them HOMO and LUMO, and the gap between HOMO LUMO is the band gap. Now suppose for one same molecule you have this gap around 1 electron volt, so you want to reduce it. So basically what you have to do, you have to put more and more atoms in the chain, then this spreading will continue, and then you can tune this thing band gap, right? If you want to decrease this band gap, then just you have to decrease some of the number, increase this band gap, then you have to decrease the chain length, right? So this opens up a very useful chemistry technique, chemistry approach to tune these molecular properties. And how, so that is one primary difference of organic semiconductors. But only remember one thing, these are overlap of electron clouds. They are not like the continuous band. They are the overlap of one side and overlap in the other side, right? So they are kind of discrete states. So this HOMO-LUMO has lot of discrete energy states very close, the overlapping of electrons and overlapping of p orbitals, but they are discrete. They are closely spaced but discrete. So from there, their charge transport property is also. So inorganic, one what we consider that once I have one electron in the conduction band, it can move very. That is what was the because we have a continuous conduction band. So here, if you see what is the density of states and how these energy states are situated, they have basically discrete, closely spaced energy states. So this is the insight of your conduction band, like LUMO or HOMO, right? Now, depending on that between two energy states, how energetically they are different and how much spatially they are separated, how far they are, and how how high energetically equal they are. Depending on that, the electron can hop from one side to another side, and they can keep on moving. Right. So this transport is known as hopping. This is not a band transport, but this is a hopping transport. Now, when something is getting hop from one side to another side, obviously their motion speed will be little slower comparative to the continuous motion, right? So hopping makes the organic semiconductors mobility lower than inorganic semiconductors, right? And one last thing that you should understand about these organic semiconductors, that exciton, the binding energy, right? So for inorganic, I did not talk about this exciton during the inorganic semiconductors. Every time I said, okay, you shine light, the photon energy, if it is greater than the band gap, it will create one hole free, right? And all these things for inorganic. But for organic semiconductor, there is an intermediate state. What is that? After shining light, the photon get absorbed and it creates electron and hole similar to the inorganic materials. But the dielectric constant of organic semiconductor, because they are soft materials, their atoms are far from each other, the dielectric constant is lower compared to the inorganic semiconductor. So when the dielectric constant is lower, if you think about these two charged particles sitting at a distance of r, these two charged particles sitting at a distance r, so what is the attractive force, Coulomb force between them? Q1, Q2 by 4 pi epsilon not epsilon r by r square, right? So epsilon, the dielectric constant, is very important. The more the epsilon is, the smaller the attracting force between them. The lower the binding energy, the dielectric constant means higher the binding energy, right? Now for inorganic semiconductors, in most of the cases, that dielectric constant is around 10, 12, 15, 20. So that makes that force between two opposite charges so weak that your thermal energy, which is 0.025 electron volt at room temperature, is sufficient to break that binding energy. But for organic semiconductors, this dielectric constant is mostly between 1 to 3 relative dielectric permittivity. So in that case, this force, the attractive force between these two, or the binding energy, becomes more than 1 electron volt. And your room temperature, which is having 0.025 electron volt, is not anymore sufficient to break those charge carriers. So what is happening for organic semiconductor? When you shine light, you generate electron hole pair, but the room temperature is not sufficient enough to make them free electron and free hole. They recombine very quickly. So you have to come up with some idea that before they can recombine, you have to break them. You have to make them free charge carriers. So that is the one extra hurdle, one extra thing you have to do for organic solar cells to be efficient. Otherwise, these materials absorbs very efficiently. They are so much good. I have already told, but this is the grand challenge of organic solar cells. So this bound state, before they become the free state, this bound state is known as the excitons. There can be two kind of external WM or Franklin exciton. Franklins are much harder to break because they are very close, and Werner Mott excitons are relatively easier, but still you have to break something. So this exciton, the hopping transport, and the band gap, how homolumo is forming. So these are the three things which is completely different from the inorganic semiconductor so far you have talked about, right? But otherwise the impact and the applications are hugely different. So how people have started making solar cells? Once they see that the organic semiconductors are semiconducting in nature, they can do these and that. So they started making devices. The first generation device was like we took two electrode and we sandwich one single layer between them, like the way we do for silicon. Unfortunately, those solar cells shows only efficiency around 0.1. And then came the bilayer concept that you have one p-type semiconductor, one n-type semiconductor. Here we call it donor and acceptor molecules sandwiched between two electrodes. The efficiency increases up to 1%, which is almost 10 times improvement, right? And the recent trend is that instead of taking bilayer, we mixed them. It's called BHJ, bulk heterojunction solar cell. So we take a p-type material, n-type material in solution, and mixed solution we prepared, and then we use them in a single layer type concept. And there we can get 10 to 15% efficiency. Why such evaluation is happening and what is the basic physics behind that, I will talk about that. That why single layer was so weakly efficient, and then efficiency increases, and from based on that concept that why it is increasing, we come up with the 10-15% efficiency nowadays. The typical OPP structure consists of transparent electrode because you need your light to come inside, and then you have some hole transporting layer, some electron transporting layer, and then some interface layer. So basically, that is the thing that you have your electrode, then some interface layer, and then you have your active layer, then other interface layer, and the top. Typical architecture of any organic solar cell looks like. Now, as I was saying, what is the working principle of organic solar cell? The first step is the photon absorption and creation of exciton. Now I am showing this thing in a close oval shape because they are signifying that they are still not free. They are bound state, right? So I have my photons. Now I create excitons. Now these excitons have to be broken. How we do that? By making an interface. The similar thing, the built-in potential helps you to separate charge carriers and accumulate in p-n junction. Here it is not only helping to accumulate, it is also helping to break this kind of barrier. So what is the limitation? This energy difference of p-n junction interface, the EDA, donor acceptor difference, should be greater than, we should select the material such a way that the force we create here, the built-in electric field we create here, should be greater than the EV. What is EV? EV, the binding energy of the exciton. Then only the electron will feel a force towards this side, and the hole will feel a force towards this side, and this Coulomb state will be broken. The what is it? The electron will come this side, and any hole created here will come this side by breaking the excitons, right? So the first condition that the material difference, the built-in potential we create here, have to be not only some number, it has to be a greater than the number of the binding energy of that particular material, right? So how far this energy can be filled, this force can be filled only around the near of the interface, right? So exciton, they are quasi particles, they do not have charge because one plus one negative, so basically they are quasi chargeless particle, right? So they can only be diffused, they cannot be drifted under electric field, they will not feel any electric field, right? So the diffusion moment of this exciton is very critical, and you have to make the thickness of this layer such a way that this exciton will get a finite opportunity to diffuse to the interface, and then only they will feel the force and will be dissociated. So the next stage is exciton diffusion to an interface, right? And at the interface, the charge separation and exciton dissociation happens, and after that happens, these electron and these hole will hop to the respective electron. So that is what the overall working principle of organic solar cell, right? Now you think of something, and the VOC that you can generate is basically the homolumo difference of these two materials, and it is quite common like the built-in potential, right? Now you think of the first single layer device, I do not had any PN junction or anywhere where the excitons can be broken except the electrode interfaces, right? So that is why the efficiency was very low. In the second generation, we made an PN junction, we made an interface, but all the excitons that can travel to the interface, that single interface, they could have broken or disappeared. Right? So we had some improvement, but not very improvement. But that gives an idea that okay, we need interface everywhere, because unfortunately the lifetime of these excitons are in nanoscale, nanosecond or femtosecond scale, and they can diffuse by that time only 1 to 10 nanometer. So instead of one interface, we need 1 to 10 nanometer distance apart interfaces everywhere. From there, the concept of BHG came, that let us mix the two molecules and they will be everywhere. So we can assume that systematically, symmetrically, we can distribute all over the active layer those interfaces, which will be anywhere the excitons being generated. Now they will have an opportunity to go to a nearby PN junction interface, right? So from there, the bulk heterojunction comes and it clicks. It can produce now 15% efficiently. Right. So basically, that is what I'm talking about. So suppose you have one interface in the BHG, something like that. So initially, you put photons and you generate excitons. If the exciton is too far, it will diffuse and then it will recombine and release the photon. But if it is within a distance of the interface diffusion length, it will diffuse, go to the interface, it will be separated. The electrons will go one side, holes will go to the other side. They will be collected, right? So the idea of the BHJ comes from here, that we will create similar interfaces everywhere within the material, right? And it works. But the challenge of the BHJ in that case also, that how to control those PN junctions, how to control the morphology evolution, the continuous conductivity between P-type material, N-type material. So those are the challenges people are working on. This gives you the excited diffusion length expression and the charge separation that I was saying, that binding energy and all these things. So if you put the values here, you will see most of the cases the diffusion length will come around 10 nanometer, 20 nanometer hardly, and the binding energy will come around zero point 0.1 to 1 electron volt. Right? So 1 electron volt is a huge number. Okay, so that is what people are trying, that make new molecules which can absorb more materials, give their band gap, and make a uniform morphology where we can separate those charge carriers and you can collect them in more efficient way. So that is the whole right now focus of this field, I would say, the organic solar cell field. And apart from that, stability. So some of the technique is that we want to modify their number of junctions. It's very similar to the inorganic things, apart from the fundamental things. So we want to use more number of molecules which can absorb in different ranges. We want to make tandem devices. We want to make multi junctions between them. Same techniques we can use here also. Ternary cell devices, like instead of taking two material and making a BHJ, nowadays people are thinking why not to make three material, because they are ultimately soluble, right? If we can find the appropriate band structure, we can mix instead of two material, you can mix three material, four material. That kind of opportunity also we have for organic solar cells, and some of the cells are really showing high efficiency. Uh, Cascade charge transfer, as I said, instead of two material, if we take three materials, and if we can choose those three materials such a way that their absorption and emission spectra overlap, that means suppose P3ST absorbs something and this also absorbs some other materials. Now this material we can intentionally make recombination, and this material will absorb other photons which can be absorbed by other photons which can be absorbed by P3ST and PCBM. These are some molecules. Their name are like that only. So that will work as a photon conversion kind of thing, right? So cascade energy transfer. Here we called it FRET, fractal resonance energy transfer kind of things can happen, right? So many technologies, many approaches you can take, because these molecules are soluble and get mixed with each other very easily. Parallel charge transfers is another thing, like you take one acceptor molecules and then you took two polymers, half of them use lithography kind of thing you can do, and the similar FRET effect, instead of doing bulk PHA, a dry process, thermal evaporation and all these things, and similar effect you can also expect there, and people are working on them also. Plasmonic is another technique where we put metal nanoparticles on the surface of such VHA cells, and then from the scattering and the plasmonic effect of those nanoparticles, metal nanoparticles, we increase the absorption more. And once we can increase the absorption by few fold, that means we can generate more and more excitement. That is how, and this plasmonic technique is also nowadays, now people, it has started with organic semiconductors, but now people are also trying to utilize it with silicon solar cell, because as I said, silicon has very low absorption coefficient, so you need 300 micron of thickness, right? So people are trying to utilize plasmonic and other techniques where they can increase the absorption so that they can decrease the material amount. Suppose they can increase the absorption thing by plasmonic by tenfold, then they can think of, instead of 300 micron thick layer, they can think of like 200 micron or 150 micron. So that will reduce the material cost and fabrication cost, right? The same technique also we use in organic solar cells and plasmonic. So that also shows, many group has shown that depending on the nanoparticle shape and size, the effect varies, and varies the efficiency as well. Right? Nowadays, another concept of organic solar cell is coming, like inverted. Without the regular architecture, they use the inverted architecture, right? So instead of P and N, they are making N and P kind of thing. These are just tricks that at which side you want to collect your electron and holes. Suppose some material has high electron conductivity, some material has low electron conductivity. So you want to put them in a closed direction towards the electron collecting electrode, right? So in that way, you can flip their architecture. Those are known as inverted organic solar cells or something. Our inverted solar cells have one advantage, that since it is inverted, it is covered under the metal surface, so their uh, lifetime is little better. Okay, so challenge is the lifetime, as I said, because these molecules are not stable under light and not stable under moisture and oxygen, but still the efficiency chart, if you see, this shows, you can see it in the Wikipedia later. So because this is a little bit smaller front here, but if you see, this organic comes here, organic, the orange circle, and we are nowadays around 18.2% efficient, right? So this is NREL chart. You can go to the NREL website and you can verify which technology is standing where. So organic has started around 2000, after 2000, and it has peaked a lot, right? So similarly, perovskite is started around 2010. It has peaked up to that, and even beyond that. So these are the things going on, going around. You can have an overview of the technologies where they stand, right? The emerging technologies. So all these are emerging technologies. You can see and compare their performances. So to conclude, the high efficiency, of course, one of the target area. The simplicity in fabrication processing, that gives you the freedom of low cost technology. Mechanical flexibility, that gives you the opportunity for building integrated solar cells and all these things. But the challenges are short diffusion length, sometimes low absorption, and the tandem architecture with plasmonic and all these things. That also creates a lot of trouble in lifetime and all these things, right? So now I will, before going to the other section, I will share one of the two very small video clipping from YouTube, that from other universities. Then you will see that when I talk about the fabrication is so easy, and that, and even we can do it on our lab. So how we do it on our lab, in our lab, that you can have an idea that within on our bench top things kind of thing, we can make really good efficiency. Industry compatibility things are also there. So let me share that. Yeah. So this is one small video. Yes, the next video, this was about the lab scale thing. Now, next video, you can see that how in roll to roll production, we can do large scale devices. So this video has sound, right? You guys can hear the sound or not? The audio is coming. The audio is available to you.
No, sir, it is not audible.
It's not okay, but the video is audible, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The video you can see. Okay.
Sir, I think there is an option to include the system sound. So that after clicking on that, we can hear the audio only.
Okay, let me
Otherwise,
answer first. That I can do. Is it audible now?
yes, sir, yes, sir.
This is basically showing the roll to roll production. Here you can almost print like a newspaper. So these are the solar panels we are printing. You can see how flexible the solar panels, right? They can be folded and they can be rolled. So everything is possible. Okay, so let us go in the next topic. The primary application are the same as I said, the flexible things and all these things. And one more such possibility are with dye-synthesized solar cells. So you can see here also they are printed of various color, that means various gap, and the building integrated thing that I was talking about, that you can integrate with building shape and size and orientation. It looks so nice, and then it can produce power for your building, which we called like zero energy building. That building is sufficient capable of producing its own power, right? I'm audible, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are on.
So these are the cells that we call dye-synthesized solar cells, or DSSC. So first, Professor Gradgel invented this, and these cells are quite different than any PN junction. So far, whatever we are talking about, those were like typical PN junction kind of thing, right? Even for organic polymer solar cell, we talk about we need to have one donor molecule, P-type molecule, one acceptor molecule, and then you have the mix. But these are kind of electrochemical cells. These are not like solid state PN junction cells. They are quite different. I will show that. So they are new kind of relatively low cost. Of course, the great potential again is all the potential that we have for other molecules we are talking about. But they are really new kind of cell. So these cells I said, Gradual invented that these cells have three components. Instead of only semiconductors, two kind of semiconductor and electrode, this cell has typically one electrode, then one wide bandgap semiconductor, then a dye, organic molecule, and then electrolyte. You need to have electrolyte, liquid electrolyte, and then another electrode. So this is basically summarize the interaction is between the anode and the cathode and nanoparticle based. Basically, TiO2 we use for the wide band gap TiO2 and the light sensitive dye. Many things are involved. As I said, these I will come to that point how it works. So these cells typically have transparent conducting electrode. Of course, every solar cell needs that to allow the light come. And then we need a wide band gap nanostructure molecule, and then the dye and the dye. Right, as I said. So typical architecture is something like that. You have one electrode here, you have one transparent electrode here, and your TiO2 or other oxide materials, wide bandgap semiconductors are in connection with one electrode, and then you put your absorbing molecule, which is dye, and then you put all over the same thing, the electrolyte, liquid electrolyte, and you sandwich it between the top electrode, right? So typical architecture cross-sectional view of a dye-synthesized solar cell is, you can understand it is completely different, right? So far we had two electrode and all the semiconductors were inside, right? But now you see two electrodes are there, then nanoparticle wide bandgap semiconductors are there, then again another semiconductor which is known as dye is there, then everything is submerged under the liquid electrolyte. So this formula and this working principle is quite different. And this is the side view of the device. Basically the same thing. We have two electrodes, then we have nanoparticles merged with your dye, and then we have our dye the cell connected by let us not talk about all these things. So how does this cells work? Basically, at initial state, I have the TiO2 on ITO, right? And then I spread dye, then electrolyte, then cathode. So what happens? All these are having their own electronic energy state through which the conduction can happen, right? Dye has a band gap, TiO2 has its work function, and the electrolyte has a redox potential. What is the redox potential? Redox potential is the potential at which the biasing, at which the electrolyte can get oxidized, right? And the cathode is there. So what happens when I shine light? The light absorption is taking place by the dye, which is absorbing molecule, and it creates one electron and hole within the dye. Now, at the second stage, those electrons readily go to the TiO2 because they have a matching energy state between them. So those electrons readily goes to the TiO2 and get out from the device, collected by the device electrode, right? Then what happens? When they are taken out by the electrode, these dye become oxidized. One electron loses oxidized, right? So that oxidized dye now have to be again balanced by some other electrons. That electron is given by the electrolyte, and how that electron is coming from the to the electrolyte from the cathode. So the cathode gives a one hole, then a redox potential happens, and then it got balanced by the dye molecule. So this is quite different, right? Initially, what we had one p-type material, one n-type material. We shine light, we create electron hole. They are being collected. But here it is not like that. Here you excite your dye, and then you quickly take out the electron. The dye got oxidized, and that electron is now replaced by the electrolyte through redox potential, and then that redox potential is again taken care by the metal cathode. So here, the maximum voltage that we can generate is basically the difference between the redox potential and the TiO2 band gap, the electron affinity, right? Because the electron and hole transition, if you pay attention, is taken place by these and these, redox potential versus the TiO2 electron state, right? So that controls the maximum voltage also, which is the VOC, right? So in summary, if we write down the steps, has 4, 5, or 6 stages. Like first, initially your dye took the photon and become excited. Then the excited dye give electron to the TiO2 and become S+. that electron is now traveling through the TiO2 to the electrode, remaining electrode. Now the H plus, that oxidized dye, is now getting negative ions, charges from that dye itself, and becomes stable, and the dye got reduced. Then the reduced dye is now again getting electron from the counter electrode. So this is the total flowchart of the working principle. So this was completely different concept. This was still can produce current and voltage, but it is completely different from the conventional thought process of solar cells, right? Until now, we have never talked about anything like that. So this is kind of more like a chemical cell, right? So Professor Gatchell then worked a lot on that and received achieved 13%, 14% devices, and it was very easy to make in lab, very easy. But the problem was there that everything is stable here. Electrodes are stable, dye are stable, TiO2 stable, but the long-term stability of the devices again become a problem. Why? Because we had liquid electrolyte. Liquid electrolyte, in terms of stability, liquid electrolyte are very good solvent. They can dissolve almost everything. So over the time, they corrode the electrode, they corrode the TiO2, they dissolve the dye. So over time, it becomes very problematic to keep the frame of the structure intact. And one more thing was there. So you have to encapsulate everything in a solid thing or some impermeable thing. Otherwise, this electrolyte with time got dry or leaked out. And once that electrolyte is not there, the whole system will not work, right? So that are the two major limitations of dye-synthesized solar cells. Otherwise, they are completely different nature of solar cell, and they are kind of more like mimicking the nature, right? Mimicking the nature in terms, if you see the photosynthesis, how it is being done by plants, leaf, and all these things, they almost follow the same thing, because plant also takes something like that. Plants receive the sunlight from on their leaves, and then some chemistry is going on, photosynthesis, right? And in terms of that, they produce power, energy for them, and the plant leaves. Let's see, almost same thing we are doing in the Professor Gatchell was so innovative that he identified almost the same thing, that how we can mimic the nature and we can produce the similar kind of effect in terms of photovoltaic things, right? So these are, you see, some dye molecules. If you change the dye molecules, even depending on the band gap of the dye molecule, you can change the colors, and they even make a plant out of it. And you see these panels are so beautiful and colorful. So many things can be done. So applications, yes, the same application as I was talking are same. We can have many flexible applications here. Lightweight, flexible, low cost, efficient, building integration, everything is possible here, right? And you see some of the dye synthesized solar cell applications. I'm so here also, this building has its roof made of dye synthesized solar cell. These beautiful plant architecture is made of dye synthesized solar cell. These are some other indoor dye synthesized solar cell architectures. You can see this lady is wearing the sunglass made of dye synthesized solar cell, which is giving the sunglass effect, as well as you can run your mobile phone using these sunglasses if they are very efficient, right? So these are the typical applications of dye synthesized solar cells. So conclusion is similar to the organic thing, that yes, many other possibilities we have here, higher conversion, lower cost, and all these things. But the challenge is here again the lifetime, but not like organic semiconductor. Here we don't have that problem of excitones and dissociation. Everything is taken care by electrolyte and the TiO2. In terms of that, the synthesized solar cells are even more efficient and more easier to control. The only problem is that if this electrolyte can be replaced, if this electrolyte can be a solid state electrolyte, which is the base footprint for perovskite solar cells. I'll come to that in next discussion. So that was the concept of dye-synthesized solar cells, which is having liquid electrolyte and have some challenges. Now, when we talk about perovskite solar cell, actually we are talking about a dye-synthesized solar cells with solid state electrolyte, where that leaking and drying up problem is not there. That is why perovskite has shown such a huge unprecedented improvement in such a short time, because the knowledge the steel that we developed for organic solar cells and dye-synthesized solar cells. Now, fortunately for perovskite solar cells, we utilize all of our experience, the whole community has so much understanding about the organic and dye-synthesized solar cells that we come up with everything we had for the perovskite, and it suited like a rocket, right? So basically, again, I will show you some video about how easily we can make dye-synthesized solar cells in our lab. The purpose is that you can have an idea that why people are working, so many groups are working, and how every day we are having such beautiful innovations coming around because of the simplicity of the thing, right? So let me again share my video. Is it visible?
Take a look at this. This is a dye-sensitized solar cell, and it produces electricity using simple blackberry juice. Hi, I'm Neil.
Is it visible and audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is visible
Okay.
and audible also.
Neil Abrams. Welcome back to the lab. Today we're going to look at how to make a dye-sensitized solar cell using some pretty simple materials in the lab. So let's get started. There are a few things we need to make the dye-sensitized solar cell. The first is some conductive glass, as I have a piece right here. We also will need some titania, which is a white powder we'll talk about in a few minutes, and a redox electrolyte, which will help complete our circuit. The first thing we're going to do is make a paste using the titania. This titania is going to act as a conductor for the electrons. I've placed some titania paste inside this beaker, and we're going to make a slurry using some nitric acid, dilute nitric acid. The slurry should be the consistency that it's a little thicker than water, but thinner than paste. So I'm going to add some of the acid and slowly stir until we get the right consistency. You can see now that we have a smooth paste with no lumps. It's a little thicker than water, but thinner than paste, more like the consistency of white paint or so. After we have the paste, we need to make a border on our glass so we can apply the paste. So we're going to start with a piece of indium-doped tin oxide glass. This looks like normal glass, but it actually has a conductive coating on it. To find out what side the coating is on, we're going to use a multimeter set to resistance. If we have the correct side, we'll see that the resistance goes to 0. So let's take a look. And we can see that the resistance now says 0, so we have the correct side facing up. Using some tape, we're going to make a 4-sided border around the piece of glass. 2 pieces of tape on 3 of the sides, and 1 piece of tape on the 4th side. After all the taping is completed, we'll have a cell that looks like this. We're going to then take that cell, that piece of glass, and apply our titania paste. We only need a small amount of the paste, so we're going to collect some on the spatula and place it right at the top. We can apply enough that it can go further on the glass and coat the whole piece, and we'll just wipe the excess off. We'll then use a stirring rod to press and push the paste across the glass. And that looks pretty good. If for some reason you have some streaks or it looks not quite as smooth, you can use the stirring rod and pull back again until you get a nice smooth paste. Once that paste is dried, and it will take about 5 or 10 minutes, you'll have something that looks like this. It is dry, but it still has the tape border on it. We then have to take that cell and heat it on a hot plate. So you can remove the tape and place it on the hot plate. Once it's on the hot plate, it should heat for about 10 minutes, at which time the small pieces of titanium dioxide will anneal together or slightly melt and strengthen the material. And you can see it has a nice white border on it. At this stage, we're ready to dye the cell so it can actually absorb sunlight. To dye the cell, we're going to use blackberry juice today. I've extracted some blackberry juice, and all we need is a small amount of the juice to place right on top of the cell. As we place it on to the cell, the juice will get absorbed onto the surface of the titanium dioxide, forming a nice purple compound. This should take about 5 or 10 minutes for complete absorption. We're going to then take the cell and rinse off the dye. First using deionized water. And you can see that nice purple color is left behind. That purple color is comes from a compound known as an anthocyanin. Those anthocyanins are found in raspberries, blackberries, cherries, pomegranates, and all of those fruits can actually make this type of cell. I've done this final rinse with isopropanol. The isopropanol acts as a drying agent to remove any of the water that's present. You can then use a simple Kim wipe to blot the surface dry. And we have our working side or anode of the cell ready to go. The other part of the cell that we need is a back electrode or counter electrode. The counter electrode is also another piece of glass, just like the front electrode, except that's been coated with a small amount of graphite from a pencil, just colored in. That pencil lead acts as a catalyst to keep the reaction going. We're going to take that pencil side and put it down on top of the cell. If you're unsure about the conductive side, just use your multimeter. We're then going to take the cell and clamp it together using some binder clips, making sure to offset the edges so we can apply our multimeter probes. At this stage, the cell is ready to go, except that there's no conductivity. We're going to add the conductivity using a redox electrolyte made of iodine and potassium iodide. Just put 2 or 3 drops at the top and squeeze the binder clips in and out a few times until the dye and redox electrolyte are mixed together. At this stage, we have a working solar cell. So let's take a look. Taking our multimeter again, we're going to change it to millivolts. Depending on what type of multimeter you have, the way you change it will be different. To make the measurement a little easier, I'm going to apply some alligator clips to the probes, and then those alligator clips are going to get connected to the cell. As I connect it to the cell, we should start to see a voltage. And in fact, as I move it into the light, we see over 250 millivolts right now. And that's just using room light. So as you can see, we were able to make a dye-sensitized solar cell, a cell that produces electricity just using simple blackberry juice.
Yeah, so I hope you got an overview how easy by taking berries and cherries, some fruit juice, how can you make dye-synthesized solar, right? This is awesome. Okay, so the last thing that I will talk about today, solar cell, which is basically, as I said, the combination of the skill and the knowledge and the experience you develop for all. Right? Perovskite is nothing but one more new molecules. So basically, the history and fabrication techniques and the challenges I will talk about. So it was a big news around 2030 or 2010. After that, Professor Snaith, one of his lab members, one of his lab members came suddenly running, and he was like drunk that day. He was so excited. He said that, see, Professor Henry, I made something which is showing 10% efficient solar cell. 10% efficient solar cell around 2010 was a big news. And he said, okay, I think you looks very drunk. You go back and tomorrow you can repeat your experiment. And then he become very angry on professor, and he said, no, you come now and check it. And all of us and Henry was so surprised that moment that something amazing is happening there, right? So that was become a big news later on 2013 and all thing. And since then, this field has taken over like all the other perovskite solar materials and all these things, right? So everybody nowadays are talking about perovskite solar. So basically, you see the advantage of perovskite solar cells, as I said, raw material cost in terms of any other material is low. Material cost is again low. Fabrication cost is very, very low. Energy payback period is of course low, and efficiency is very. Basically, this material was first discovered by Professor Demosley long back. He was a mining engineer. He was taking, so this is kind of a salt, right? So we get it in earth crust very easily, abundant and all these things. So this methyl ammonium lead halide, which is now champion perovskite materials, also have a similar perovskite structure. So what is perovskite structure? So this he is scientist Perovsky, on his name only the material has name. Perovskite structure is basically a very extreme. These crystal structures, call them perovskite, right? So now some of these materials which is having perovskite materials are showing extremely beautiful and efficient performances in terms of solar cell, right? So now the material I will be talking about, the methyl ammonium lead halide. Here we have a methyl ammonium ion and as well as lead halide ion, right? So the basic structure of the perovskite solar cell is same as I was talking about disynthesized. So I have a conducting electrode, then I have TiO2, then on top of it we have some other small molecules and electrolyte. That was the structure of disynthesized, right? Now that electrolyte had some problem at that moment. So we also tried Al2O3 instead of TiO2 and disynthesized. So here what we do for perovskite solar cell, basically we replace this liquid electrolyte by methyl ammonium halide ion. And then we have HTL and ETL and our electrodes and all these things. And even nowadays we showed, many groups are showing that even you don't need the TiO2, you can only use the perovskite. So as I was saying, the perovskite itself is basically the combination of organic solar cell, which is this kind of structure, and the disynthesized solar cell, which is having the nanostructures and the electrolyte, and now we replace the electrolyte by perovskite. So in both this structure, both this device architecture, this material has working rapidly and very, very efficiently, and nowadays even we can think of 25-26% efficient. And the tandem structure predicted for perovskite is like 40-50% efficient devices with in combination of silicon and other molecules, right? So the architecture is same. What is the novelty of these materials? The material is, unlike the organic solar cell, organic or polymer, these materials are having very high dielectric constant. They have every advantage of organic or polymer materials, but apart from that, they have another one advantage, which was the grand challenge for organic, that these molecules do not produce exciton at room temperature. Because of their high dielectric constant at room temperature, wherever you generate, they are immediately free charge carriers, right? So that is the one advantage over the organic solar cells. And the second advantage, this perovskite molecule, methyl ammonium lead halide, has iodine inside, MAI PbI2, right? So it has iodine inside. So they are working as, and those iodine can move through the crystal structures, atom space, but they are in solid form. So this perovskite again can work as a very efficient electrolyte, but in forms of solid state, they are not liquid. So you see, this perovskite molecule brings all the advantages in such a way that you can overcome the challenges of organic and disynthesized solar cells at the same time, right? So that is how this molecule has performed so well. Again, this is one of the typical schematic of the cross-sectional ACM of such one device, where I have glass here, and then FTO or ITO up to this part, and then TiO2 are these nanoparticles. Then we have our methyl ammonium lead H3 NH3 PbI3. So I have iodine here, right, which can move. So then I have HTL and the top gold electrode. You can use silver also. So basically, this is the typical cross-sectional view of a perovskite solar cell. But you can see everything is solid here. The band diagram something look like this. So here, once you have our perovskite, it is the absorbing active layer here. It creates electron hole pairs, and then the hole can go through the hole transporting material towards the aluminum gold electrode, and the electrons can move through the TiO2 like the dye-synthesized solar cell that out the electron very rapidly and goes to the FTO. This is basically again from this band structure you can see dye-synthesized solar cell, right? So now people are trying to find out. So what are the challenges? As I said, the molecule we are talking about CH3 NH3 PbI3. So it has a lead, right? So lead has toxicity. And also, if you see, this is basically a salt, so it dissolves very well. Of course, it is under solid state at initially, but little bit of moisture and water if you put or any other solvent, it dissolves very rapidly. So the lifetime and the lead, these are the two challenges that you have to overcome before you see that this technology is hitting the market. Right? So then people are trying to find out various new molecules like inorganic oxide perovskite or halide perovskites, intrinsic perovskite, dope perovskite, cesium perovskite, lead-free perovskite. People are trying to take out because basically this is a structure AVX3, so people are trying to make permutation combination of molecules whatever is available in periodic table within the form of AVX3 and trying to test their performance. But so far somehow this methyl ammonium lead halide is the best molecule in terms of efficiency. And again, if you see the absorption profile of this molecule, you will see it can absorb from all the way from 300 and also these blue and this red are the two different varieties of perovskite molecules. It can absorb from almost 300 to 800, which was the primary target from the solar spectrum. We talked in the first class that if I have to make a solar cell and choose a new material, I will choose a new material which can at least absorb very efficiently the visible spectrum of the solar spectrum, right? And you see the spectrum is almost square in shape, right? It has no peak. It can broadly absorb all the photons available from 400 to 800 nanometer range. So this molecule is really good in terms of absorption. And the band gap tuning, again, like the organic thing, it is very easy. By changing the MAI, like by changing the iodine and the cation and anion of this molecule, you can basically tune their band gap so well. You see, I have now a set of molecules. By changing the ratio of bromine versus iodine and Ma versus Ma, I can set a series of molecules which are having band gap from 1.5 electron volt to almost 2.2 electron volt with a very square shape absorption, right? With a very high absorption coefficient in the range of 10 to the 4, 10 to the 5 per centimeter inverse, right? So the band gap tuning is very easy, like the organic thing. The movement, but it does not have the excitonic problem. It is a electrolyte kind of thing, but it is not liquid. So everything as if it has its own advantage, right? So there are some typical image of some of the perovskite solar cells made of with band gap tuning. You can see some is dark brown to yellow, and depending on the absorption and all these things, the bromine content, you can basically tune their band gap, right? By bromine content. Increase the bromine content, the band gap keep on increasing up to certain extent. These kind of technologies and studies that people are doing also. But what as I said, the drawbacks are the stability lead and the stability. So this is one of the picture that shows you the lifetime of the devices under a relatively humid condition. And in India or Asia, humidity is a problem, right? So when the humidity increases, the lifetime decreases. You see, almost within 20-30 hours, that means within a day, the efficiency from in a scale of 1, it brings down to 0.3 or something. So 70% efficiency is degraded by one day, one single day. So any humidity more than 50% is very, very harmful for perovskite solar cells. As I said, they are salt. So any moisture, any water dissolve them very quickly, and that brings the degradation, right? So packaging and insulation will be a difficulty or challenge for this technology. But people are trying to make new molecules which has very low solubility in moisture, and by that way, people are trying to increase the efficiency. Nowadays, reported like 1,000 hours of ambient condition, and the field is improving. So thermal efficiency is again another thing. In presence of moisture, if you have heat also, like the ideal condition for India, humid, hot and humid condition, that degradation even accelerates. So earlier I was saying one day. Now if you have little bit of temperature, you see within 60 minutes, 1 hour, the devices can degrade. How we decide the device has degraded? Because when they lose their dark brown color and they turn into yellowish, that means they have lost the I3 part and MA part. Only the lead is left. So they do not perform anywhere after that point of time, right? So you see the lifetime was earlier one day and humidity. Now with humidity plus temperature, it goes to 1 hour. So 1 hour, one day, although it has 30% efficiency, if somebody cannot solve this problem, this material will not come as a technology. But people are trying, and we are having some new molecules and new materials where the stability increases. For example, instead of MAI, methyl ammonium iodide, if we take FAI, which is fluoride-based molecules, the degradation has been slowed down from, you see, this MAI, it started to lose the color so rapidly within a few hours. But FAI, because the F has a larger radius than M, it has still some brownish structure left here, right? So even after 17 hours. So people are trying to understand how this behavior can be frozen, how this degradation can be frozen. And one of the aspects people have found out that if you change the cation and anion size so that they cannot escape from the film, then the degradation can be reduced. So anyway, whatever problems are there, since the efficiency is so high, the flexibilities are there, the low cost technology is there, and the molecules are so easy in terms of mechanical and chemical flexibility. So the potentials are there. We must say the future is bright, and 40-50% efficiency with at least 5 years of lifetime, if we can achieve, these materials will be so cheap that 5 years lifetime will be more than enough. So if we can achieve that part, and I'm hopeful that by next 5 or 6 years we will achieve that hurdle, we cross that hurdle, and we will see the really ideal solar cell devices in our rooftop everywhere installed, which will be having very high efficiency and very low cost, where we can think of a world where we really do not have to burn the fossil fuels to generate any electricity. So that is the end of my talk. Now I will show one more small video about the perovskite solar cell, and you can understand the simplicity for like organic and dye-synthesized. The perovskite solar cell is also very simple, and we can make it in our lab with all the small equipments. So the industry can do in a very other efficient way. So let me share that again. Okay, so that's all from my side. Professor Panda, Devashish?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, so I'm done.
Yeah, session is open for question answer. You can ask the question to Dr. Karatne.
Good morning, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Sir, just for a quick recap, just if I want to
Your
summarize.
voice is not audible. Devani.
Yes. Okay, sir. Just a minute, sir. So if I want to, am I audible right now?
Yeah, carry on.
Okay, just if I want to summarize the thing that what the make a solar cell, if I want to make a solar cell with very high efficiency, and I want to summarize that, what are the important factor I have to taken care of. So what are those factors?
Yeah, so that factors are mostly generic, right? So you have to have understand the overall photovoltaic mechanism. What are the parts included? First, the absorption, right? So you have to choose a material which can absorb the solar spectrum. The more it can absorb is better. So material selection should be like that. The band gap and all these things should be identified in a way that it can absorb the broader spectrum and having a higher absorption coefficient. Okay, that is the first thing. And then the second step is what? You have to, after absorption, you have to generate those electrons and you have to collect them, right? So you have to choose the material in terms of their mobility also, that how efficiently after generation, after absorption, how efficiently they create the electron hole pairs and how efficiently they move the electron hole pairs, right? So the material transport property is also very important. You have to understand the doping, you have to understand their crystalline structure, their purity, how many traps are there, and how to remove the traps, and all these things you have to identify. And the next last stage is that whatever the charge generations are there and transport is there, after everything is happening, you have to collect them at the outside in the circuit, right across the load. So that is taken care by your electrode. So you have to select the electrode material and the interface between the semiconductor and the electrode, metal electrode, such a way that after generation and transport, there should not be any more hurdle for them, those charge carriers, to go to the outer circuit, right? So you have to choose the work function of the electrode such a way, you have to choose the interface material so that you don't have any traps at the interfaces and all these things. So all these three combination of device fabrication, material choice, the architecture, everything you have to take care.
So just last question. So in line with the agreement of your third point, that is we need a good power transformation circuit. So as we know, solar cell is a kind of, power generation. So in that case, if I want to get whatever the power it can generate, if I want to take it from in the other circuitry, so what will be that criteria I should have to maintain?
You have to maintain in everything, you have to maintain the load point such a way that your solar cell, whatever the solar cell you are using, does not matter silicon or CIGS or anything, it is always around the maximum power point, right? Then only you can get the maximum power whatever is generated and whatever is feasible out of the solar cell. So you have to design your circuit. You know, if you are from an electrical background, you must know that power point tracker, maximum power point tracker, is a great field of electrical engineering where people are trying to get algorithms and many electronic circuit which can itself always tune the circuit outside, that if there is a fluctuation from the sun, if there is a fluctuation from the electrical signal, whatever is happening, if there is a slight degradation of the cell with time, every aspect can lead to a point where your operation conditions are not exactly matching with the maximum power point of your cell. So you have to identify the maximum power point of your cell, and you have to make sure that your load, your circuit design, your power point tracker are always in a sync, so that your device is always working at the maximum power point. So the basic idea is to keep your solar cell around a maximum power point operational conditions. That is all you have to make sure.
So as far as I know, that is a maximum power transfer theorem is there. So that is for the DC. It is should be the load is equal to the source load is equal to the source resistance is equal to the load resistance. But as we can see from your equivalent circuit structure and all the details, that is the you have also some elements that is the AC elements like capacitor. So in that case, the load in the interfacing circuitry will be
Capacitor is not there.
I think
Where is the capacitor?
Like diode you have. So in that
diode anyway, it will produce only DC current, right? It will have some interface capacitance and all these things, but the current it will produce, it will DC current.
Okay, so you are only considering the DC, not
yes,
AC
of course.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I think Disiprit Upadhyay has some question in chat box. Can you please read and answer, Dr. Karak?
Chat box?
Yes. Or Disiprit, if you want to speak directly, that will be better.
Hello.
Just,
Hello.
Madam.
Yes, thank you, Professor Karak. So I have some questions from this presentation as well as from the last presentation. So today's questions is, if you go now where you have shown that bulk heterostructure organic solar cell, so just to increase the efficiency, instead of depositing electron donor and electron acceptors, you are mixing these two all. So they are forming some islands. So suppose one island is collecting holes and another is collecting electrodes, but all islands are not connected to the top and bottom electrode. So the islands which are not connected to electrodes, how the hole or electron will be transferred to the respective electrodes to get current?
So this is basically a very good question, and if you remember, I said that point that this is when you mix the two material. Let me go there. If you mixing two materials blindly, sometime it may happen that you have an internal connection between the islands. Sometime it may not, right?
Yes.
So when I'm talking about these 15%, 16% devices, what people have done, they have make sure by changing the concentration of one material versus other material, by using some additives and all these things. So it is not like that I had 1% efficient for bilayer devices and I just mixed and I got 15%. No, when we do that, initially 1% becomes 0.5%, and then slowly after optimization of the morphology, you are talking about morphology. So after optimization, many optimizations, thermal annealing, then concentration ratio, how much of X material, how much of Y material we have to mix, and which solvent to use, and all these things can play very crucial role to make sure that you not only are having different PN junction in cluster forms, also you are having an interdigitated connection between them, so that once they got dissociated in one island, suppose this island here, it also have a continuous path to the opposite electrode. Otherwise, it will be a recombined again, right? So yes, this is very, very crucial. And the devices we are talking about 15%, 16%, 70%, that we have achieved only after morphology optimization in terms of that aspect only, where we not only created PN interfaces at every 5-10 nanometer, we also have make sure that those PN junction has internal connectivity. So that is extremely crucial.
Okay, thank you. And another question is, suppose I am using dye but not using electrolyte. So this type of, what we call this type of solar cells or of optoelectronic devices?
You mean to say that you will use the dye, but there is no electrolyte, right?
Yes.
So then what will happen? Then the problem will be that this TiO2 will take out the electron very easily, right? Go to that. And your dye will be oxidized. So who will keep your dye, bring your dye to the normal state? There will be no one to make this S plus converted into S again. And if that is not possible, after some time that S will have no more electrons to donate and the whole process will stop. Somebody has to take care of the extra electron part, and that is coming from the counter electrode to the electrolyte through the redox reaction to S plus and converting the S plus into S, so that the next photon can come and make the S again S star and then S plus. Right? Otherwise,
so if dye is collected to the electrodes, which supply electrons to reduce it.
Now then it becomes a solid state device, right? So that is the thing we are doing in perovskite, right?
Okay.
So that is completely
actually,
different.
I am using dye, but not using electrolyte. So can I say this as a dye synthesized solar cell, or simply organic solar cell? That is my question.
I think that becomes simply organic solar cell.
Okay. 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 And from the sorry for the disturbance.
That's fine.
Okay. And the next question is, can you please elaborate what is external quantum efficiency and internal quantum efficiency? And actually, that idea is not clear to me. And is internal quantum efficiency exceeds more than 100%?
Okay, so see, quantum efficiency gives you basically two things. How many electrons and holes are being generated when you shine one photon, right? So if each and every photon can generate one electron hole pair, that means the conversion efficiency after absorption, the conversion efficiency of generation is 100% if they can do, right? So this process is basically the internal quantum efficiency. The shining light, photon is going there and creating one electron hole pair. Up to that part is internal. Now what is external? The overall efficiency of solar cell does not stop there. The process has many more things, right? You shine light, the photon strikes, it creates one electron hole pair. Now you have to have separation of those electron hole pairs and move them to the electrodes and then collect. Then only you have the overall efficiency, right? So when that aspect comes into picture, it has been observed that each photon is not, although they are producing one electron hole pair, we are not collecting one electron and hole pair for each photon because there are recombinations, there are traps and all these things. So maybe 100 photons are only capable of giving us 80 electrons, although they have generated 100 electrons initially, but within the process of transport and collection and all these things, we have those 20 electrons and we have been able to collect only 80 electrons. So this collection, when you consider this collection, that becomes external quantum efficiency. External, what you are getting at the end of the day, right? So external quantum efficiency has generation as well as collection included, and internal quantum efficiency is only the generation part. So internal quantum efficiency can be 100%, but external quantum efficiency in real world never can be 100% because there are always losses, and losses in terms of 69% even, right? So losses are there. So although each and every photons are probably generating one electron hole pair in real in an ideal condition, but there is no way that we can collect all the 100 of them. So external quantum efficiencies are always lower than 100%. Internal quantum efficiencies at some conditions, not always, can be 100%.
But many people report their external quantum efficiency is more than that, 200, 300.
Not for solar cell. I think those you are talking about some amplification in photo detectors and all these things, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we are talking about solar cell.
Okay, thank you for your response. And how VOC is dependent on temperature?
I showed already. Let me go back. Design of solar cells, if you remember in my last class, I think I have shown the temperature and radiation variation, right? Yeah. You see, VOC has I naught, right? You see, IL by I naught log fog is there, and all. So I naught depends on the thermal generation, right, and the band gap. So if you put this value, you will get dVOC dt, which is the temperature variation of VOC in terms of this 1 over T VOC minus Eg by Q. What is Eg? The band gap. And what I have discussed before that, how the VOC depends on Eg. Although in ideal case, if we have a single layer, the VOC, the maximum VOC is supposed to be the band gap by the charge of the electron. But in real world, due to p-n junction formation, the quasi-Fermi level distribution and all this, we have little bit of drop here, little bit of drop. VOC actually becomes the difference between the Fermi level of the n side versus the p side, not the Eg by charge. And this VOC is always lower than Eg, the band gap, right? So now if you use that same concept in this equation, we can always say that in real world, VOC is always lower than Eg, right? So this term as a whole comes negative. So dVOC dt, the temperature variation of voltage, open circuit voltage, is always negative in the real world. That means if I increase the temperature, I will decrease the VOC.
Okay, thank you for your response.
Yeah, there are another question. This is last question. I don't want to take any more questions. If you have any questions, then you can ask mail Professor Karak. So one question from Disiprit Upadhyay. MA PB I3 perovskite is biodegradable in nature or not? Perovskite, I think.
Not biodegradable because it has lead inside. The total molecule has two things. Why it is hybrid? Because it has organic component which is Ma, and it has inorganic component PbI3, right? So Pb and I3 are not biodegradable where Ma is. So the whole molecule is not biodegradable.
I hope he got his answer. So I don't want to elaborate this session now. I'd like to request Dr. Kaustav Das from Jadavpur University to give vote of thanks to today's first session speaker because this is his last talk. So I'd like to thank you personally, Dr. Karak, for his time. So I'd like to request Dr. Das, vote of thanks, and we'll close this session. Dr. Das, please.
Thank you, Dr. Karak, for this nice and lucid talk on the organic flexible solar cell. Actually, you have covered the basics and also the technical progress that has been achieved so far and what can be the future ahead coming for us. The lecture is not only informative, but I think you have made the lecture so interesting and the basic understanding so easy that all of us will be beneficial. And like myself, many of us are now interested to work on solar cells. So I think your lecture has motivated us. Thank you, Suprabhat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor.